All right, today we're going to cover chapter 4, loops and files. You are already familiar with loops from Python, so it should be nothing new to you. The only difference is the syntax, so the way you actually write them. So we're just going to focus very briefly because the loops actually perform the same thing in every single programming language. The only difference is how you write them. So I'm just going to show you how to write them in Java and a couple of other differences that exist between Python and Java. So the first one is the increment and decrement operators. If you remember from Python, we have this thing called our variable that's going to keep the track of how many times our loop has ran. So this is the this increment or decrement operator. So either you add one to your variable each time your loop runs, or you take one from that variable. However, instead of writing this whole thing out, this big sentence, you can do it in less characters. You can do it way easier by doing either this or this way. And the same thing for decrementing. So you just type the name of your variable. So variable, and then you add plus plus at the end if you want to add one to your variable each time your loop runs. It's just going to be added automatically. So you do not have to write this whole thing out. You can just add plus plus or minus minus either before or after the name of your variable. Now, there is no difference in using either the prefix or postfix notation. This is the prefix, this is the postfix notation. The only difference is how it looks. So they're all performing, they are performing the same action, no matter if the plus is either in the front or in the back of the variable. Now, there are different loops, obviously the same as in Python. Remember, in Python, we had the for loop, we had the while loop, we had a couple of others, but Java has its own way of writing loops. So the first thing that you need to do, we're going to focus on the while loop really quick. So the first thing that you need to do, again, you need to write your loop header. It's the same idea as in Python, nothing is changing, but you have to specify the keyword while to specify that you want to use the while loop. And then inside of the parentheses, you will put your condition. So whatever that condition is, you will put it after while in the parentheses. After that, what you're going to do, you're going to put these curly braces. Remember those curly braces, they always come when you're writing a method, when you're writing a decision structure, when you're writing a class. These curly braces will always they just specify that all of the statements that are inside of them belong to one structure. In this case, they will all belong to the while loop. Now, the same idea works with classes, with if structures, so your decision structures, with any other loop. Everything that you want to belong to that loop needs to be in between of the curly braces. And then all of your statements obviously need to end with a semicolon. Now, that's just Java. We already know that. End with a semicolon. Let's see. Obviously, you need to be careful to not make an infinite loop. An infinite loop is something that's going to run forever. So if your Boolean expression always evaluates to true, that will cause an infinite loop. For example, if we have a loop that will check if our variable, for example, x is greater than 10, while x is greater than 10, we will put something like, we'll print something, right? Doesn't really matter what, this is just pseudocode. So we'll print something. If you are not updating that x, and for example, x is 11, so if we assign 11 to an x and we check for x is greater than 10 without doing anything to the x within the loop, this will run forever. This will be printing the same statement forever, 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 until either your computer crashes or your program crashes, but this what would be called an infinite loop. To prevent that, what you can do, you can decrement your x value, and this way this loop will only run once. It will go, it will see is x greater than 10. In this case, x is greater than 10. It will run once, and then our x will become 10 instead of being 11. So instead of 11 on the second run, our x will be 10. and then this loop will not run because we are checking for strictly x being greater than 10 and x equals to 10. So this is how you prevent infinite loops. If you notice that you are in a position where you created an infinite loop, just go and check which variables are not updating. Go check how you test your condition. Probably the issue is somewhere within those two things. Now, this is just a flowchart for the while loop. It's very simple. We're checking our expression. If the expression is true, do something and go all the way to the beginning and then check that expression again. Now, if your expression is false, if it's not true, you will just follow this arrow right here and your loop will exit. Infinite loops, again, another example of infinite loop. As I said, x equals to 20. We assign x to 20, and we're checking while x is greater than 0. We will be printing x is greater than 0. Now, this variable will never get to 0 because we are not adjusting the actual variable. This will be an infinite loop. This will just print the x is greater than 0 until your program crashes. Now, one way to fix it, as I said before, just take 1 from x each time you go through this loop. This way, only 20 iterations will perform, and after that, your loop will exit. See, this is they fixed it, x minus minus, so we're just taking 1 from x each time we run this loop. Now, as I said before, curly braces are important in Java, as you may have noticed. They are required in almost everything, in almost any block statement. So in this case, all of the statements right here, they will belong to the while loop because they are in between of the curly braces. Let's see. All right, this is just an example of how to use a while loop for input validation. And let's recall what input validation is. This is when we check the input from the user. So if we want the user to enter their name, for example, and they enter a number, that means we cannot accept that input because it is a number. We want a name. So we can perform input validation and we can ask the user to type the name over and over again until we actually get a word from them. So we can perform that by using loops, input validation loops. In this case, what is happening right here, we'll just go line by line. So we are printing enter a number in the range of 1 through 100. So we are asking the user to enter a number from 1 to 100. Then this sentence right here, we're using a scanner method. Remember the scanner methods, next integer. We are getting input from the user. So, and we're storing it in the number variable. Now we want to validate that input. So we are checking using our while loop, and our condition is if the number is less than 1, or this stands for or the number is greater than 100, we will print that number is invalid, enter a number in the range of 1 through 100. So we'll just ask the user again and again and again for a number within the range. If they do not type a number within the range of 1 to 100, we will ask them over and over again. We will tell them that that number is invalid. So this is how you use while loops for input validation. Now the do while loop is also something that you are familiar with, but it is called a little bit differently in Java. So it is a post-test loop. So what that means is you're going to perform something once right here. You're going to do something and then you're going to check the condition. So it's kind of like you flip your while loop. So instead of the condition coming in first, your statements come in first. And let's see if there is an example. Yeah, so right here. So what's going to happen is we are going to perform some sort of statement, and then we're going to check our Boolean expression. And remember, in the actual while loop, our statements were somewhere right here, right? We had our statements. So now the statements come in the front. That's the only difference. Now you will perform some statement, you will check your expression. If it is true, you're going to go back and you're going to perform a statement again, and then you're going to check that expression again. For loop again, in Python, I think it's called for each loop. So it is a similar thing to the while loop because it is a pretest loop. So we check our condition first, and then some statements are executed. However, the for loop is very useful when you know how many times you want your loop to run. Because let me show you how it works. So we have some sort of expression. If it's true, we're going to perform some sort of code. Some sort of code will be executed. And then we're going to update our variable. And let's see if there is an example. All right, here's an example. So we have, let's look at this part just without this one. So just the first part. Now, this is how the for loop works. We have our initialization variable. So in this case, it's I. So we are initializing it to 5. Integer I equals 5 means that we will start counting our loops from 5. Now, let's look at the other side. We'll start counting from 5, and our integer j will start from 0. So we are using multiple variables in here. However, this loop will run until I equals 10, actually until I equals 9, because we're checking that I is less than 10. So when I will equal 9, and when j or when j will equal 19, because again, we are checking if it's 20, 19, our loop will stop executing. So in this case, we as programmers, we're specifying when this loop will end. We are not just testing some condition. We know exactly when this loop will end, either when I equals 9 or when j equals 19. And let's look and see how we increment. See that incrementing is happening within your loop header. It is not happening within your loop. It is happening within your loop header. So I will be incremented by 1 each time this loop runs. So it's going to go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then it's going to stop executing. Because remember, if I equals 9, in this case, our loop will stop executing. And when it comes to j is being incremented by 2 each time the loop runs. So we start with j at 0. So we're going to have j will equal 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on until 18, and then it's going to stop executing. Now, let me see. Apologize. Okay. Now let's see what else is here. Resting the running total. Nested loops. Okay, when it comes to nested loops, it's just a loop within a loop. So all you need to know about nested loops is just one loop within another loop. Usually it's 4 loops that are nested within each other because again, because of the ability for us to calculate how many times that loop runs. This is how you would write it. Let me see. Yeah, okay, right here. So what's going to happen is you're going to put your for loop, you're going to put whatever sentences are right here, then you're going to open your curly braces, right? Inside of these curly braces, you will put another loop. And again, you will put your curly braces right here in between. So it's fairly simple. It's just a loop within a loop, nothing too complicated. Break statement, again, these are, we already covered them in Python. The break statement will just terminate your loop when it comes to it. You usually use it with if decision structure, if else. So if some condition is met and you need to break out of the loop, you can use the break statement. So if condition is met, type break statement, the break will cause the loop to terminate. Continue statement will just stop the current iteration of a loop. So it's not gonna break the whole loop, it's just gonna break the current iteration. So whatever is happening for that iteration of the loop, you can stop it by using the continue statement, and it's gonna start fresh from the new iteration. Now here's how you decide which loop to use. Again, kind of talks about it in Python. The while loop is your pretest loop. So we have 2 pretest loops. while and for loop right here. For loop and while loop. These are pretest loops, so if you need to check your condition before your code is executed, use either the while loop or the for loop. If you want some statements to execute before that condition is checked, use the do while loop right here. However, the difference between the while and the for loop, if you know how many times you need your loop to execute, use the for loop. If you do not know, use the while loop. That's how I look at it. That's the easiest way to differentiate between the two. File input. Okay, we're gonna focus on the file input in the next lecture. That was it. Do you have any questions?
Oh, no.
All right.